For millennia, the oceans lay outside the dominion of man. A state's influence extended only 3 nautical miles from the coast, a little further than a cannonball could travel. But then, humans discovered the ocean floor. And the largest land grab in world history began.
I'm Tom McLean, I'm an adventurer. I've rowed the ocean, the North Atlantic, twice. I've sailed it twice in small yachts and also crossed it in a bottle boat. I lived on Rockall in this, some people call it a survival capsule, but I call it a wooden box. It's a house, this is my house, this is a one-man house. I lived in here for 40 days. It did the job, it kept the wind off me, I was warm and dry. But don't forget, I'm right at the top of the cliff. It's just straight down to the sea.
Tom McLean is one of the UK's greatest adventurers. He crossed the Atlantic 5 times, the first time in a rowboat, once in a vessel shaped like a beer bottle. For his latest trip, he sailed from Newfoundland to Portugal in the smallest sailboat ever to cross the Atlantic. Soon, McLean will travel to New York in a boat built to resemble a whale. But Rockall was more than an adventure, however. Rockall was a mission done in service to Mother England.
Somebody said, oh, well, what about St Kilda? And I was thinking of going there, but somebody else said Rockall. Rockall's right out there in the middle of the Atlantic, and there seems to be a dispute who owns it. And I thought, well, if I'd be a first civilian to reside on Rockall, that would help the case.
It wasn't quite so good. The wind carried their safety line off target, so chancing all, they closed in without it.
Back off.
It's very dangerous there now. You can see how lumpy it is. Quite dangerous, see?
They were far from okay. After that momentary triumph,
but then,
struck
whack,
the team.
the big wave, and down I go. Down, now it's 50 foot straight down into the foam.
Slides helplessly into the surf.
The landing at Rockall in 1985 almost cost Tom McLean his life. But he eventually made it to safety and corks flew in London. Getting to the top was only the beginning, however. Great Britain wanted to claim the rock as an island, but for that to happen, international law stipulated that Tom must remain there for 21 days or more.
When the boat turned to go home and leave me for the first time, I was glad to see them go. I was on my adventure. I'm here with the rock and the birds. I'm happy to be here. I've achieved. I'm making history.
A patriotic gesture to remind those who may challenge it that Britannia rules these waves.
For the UK, it was about more than just claiming a lump of granite in the ocean. The real objective was to secure the resource-rich area around Rockall. The islet was to play a key role in British territorial claims. The main players in British maritime claims work in an office on the south coast of England.
It's a fascinating area of work to do. It's not often, as somebody working in ocean science, that you do get the opportunity to mix both the legal and the technical aspects and see how they work together almost in order to develop something on behalf of the state. We have the United Kingdom to the east, and as we come further west, we pass the rock itself onto the Rockall Plateau. The land area of Great Britain is 240,000 square kilometres. The area that the UK have submitted for the Hatton Rockall area is 163,000 square kilometres.
My main reason to go to Rockall was to inhabit it, and if I stayed in international law less than 21 days, I'm only visiting. I had to stay more than 21 days, and by staying there more than 21 days, in fact 40 days, it wasn't a rock, it's an island. I made it an island.
Rockall. For the UK to claim the territorial sea around the rock, it had to prove that it was inhabitable. Yet the islet could be easily confused with any rock, and Tom's stay was controversial. So controversial that the UK had to put another territory into the mix, St Kilda. The archipelago increased the British Crown's claim by 160,000 square kilometres. St Kilda has been deserted ever since its 36 remaining inhabitants left almost a century ago. But humans lived there once, and they could live there again, at least theoretically. What does the UK want with all this water? What do you own by owning a piece of the ocean? The idea of the ocean has changed over time. World maps from the past show how rulers and their cartographers once saw the world and what they thought an ocean is. Their maps show what was important to them and what wasn't.
Before 1492, before Columbus's journey to the Americas, the ocean as a broad portion of the world's surface, as a major space that figured into our sense of the globe, really wasn't there.
In the Middle Ages, the world was thought to be a single large landmass, a veritable megacontinent without oceans.
So the ocean really plays no role at all except to show a limit. The ocean shows the limit of society. It shows the limit of God's kingdom, of the kingdom on earth. To the east, beyond the ocean, lay Eden, lay the promised land, lay heaven. Beyond that, there was really nothing mapped.
For most of human history, the oceans were projection screens for the imagination, an unexplored and irrepressible world, a mighty barrier, a place of terror.
For instance, on this map of the waters of Iceland by Ortelius from the 16th century, you see not only very graphic sea monsters, but little legends next to them. So for instance, a certain sea monster was known to leap into ships and grab sailors by their left arm and then bite off their right finger, and those kinds of very descriptive, very graphic images of the dangers of the sea monsters, but ultimately the dangers of the sea.
Despite its dangers, the ocean became more and more important over the centuries. As global trade developed, merchant fleets transformed the oceans into vast shipping lanes. People from past centuries would never have dreamed of laying claim to the ocean. For them, it was a blue expanse fraught with dangers, an obstacle that needed to be overcome as sailors journeyed to foreign lands.
And of course, the two-dimensional bit is ironic because the ocean is so materially three-dimensional. You know, you step into the ocean, you sink.
Yet in the 19th and 20th centuries, something happened that changed our idea of the ocean forever. the seabed became a place of exploration. In 1858, as the transatlantic cable was being laid, engineers noticed variation in the ocean's depth. Could this be evidence of undersea mountains? The first scientific study of the ocean floor was undertaken by the German survey vessel Meteor in 1925. Scientists today liken the expedition to Columbus's first voyage, for it began the exploration of a terra incognita, a previously unknown land. Over the next few decades, a picture of the undersea cosmos gradually emerged.
Suddenly we've kind of developed this new awareness of the seabed, of the underneath. Of course, this itself is also kind of a fantasized idealization of the ocean, because you're imagining that you can see through the water column. The water is missing from here, the fish are missing. Suddenly the topography of the seabed is quite literally brought to the surface.
The discovery of the seabed radically changed our idea of the ocean. The ocean was no longer just water. It was first and foremost a landmass, a vast expanse that belonged to no one, but that could perhaps be seized. This man had a groundbreaking idea.
The President of the United States, Harry S. Truman, a man whose influence as far-reaching as any other man on earth.
Harry Truman asserted his country's influence with a novel claim. This ocean was a territory underwater that could be annexed as part of the United States. Enormous quantities of oil were found in the Gulf of Mexico, but the oil lay beyond the 3-mile zone in which coastal states could exercise their sovereign rights. Truman wanted more. He wanted new territory for the United States. The superpower needed more oil urgently. Oil reserves on the mainland no longer sufficed.
Our dependence on these minerals and fuels and raw materials is so great and our supply so uncertain that we are moving as rapidly as we can and by every means that ingenuity can devise to expand facilities, to step up production, find new sources, develop substitutes, and bring in increased supplies from foreign sources.
After the Second World War, in 1945, the then U.S. President Truman issued a proclamation declaring that the natural resources in the seabed and subsoil belong to the United States of America.
In convincing the world that the American president not only had the will but also the right to incorporate undersea territory, Truman used an argument that built on a recent discovery. Some areas of the seabed are oceanic, others are continental.
The U.S. had to have this kind of basis of a geological link between its landmass and the landmass submerged and linked to its territory. And the idea of the geological continental shelf is the basis which the U.S. saw as a legal basis as well. They had to find a link, and the basis that they found most convincing was, of course, science. Yeah.
This is the North Sea coast at low tide. We can see how the sea level is defined where the coastline runs. We can see here how the continent extends into the ocean.
The argument that the continent continues underwater made up the core of Truman's justification. This was all the more convincing because the historical events that legitimized this theory reach back far into history. Impossibly far.
There's been continental drift for 2 million... No, sorry. I mean, continental drift has existed for at least 2 billion years.
Wilfried Jorkat is a geophysicist at the Alfred Wegener Institute in Bremerhaven. Alfred Wegener noticed that the coastlines of North and South America seemed to fit together with those of Europe and Africa like pieces of a puzzle.
He also found significant similarities in the geology, as well as in the flora and fauna. He concluded that the continents were once linked together. Otherwise, there'd be no way to explain why their animal and plant worlds developed so similarly.
Scientists today believe there was once a supercontinent that at some point began to drift apart. In the early 20th century, this idea seemed completely preposterous.
Let's put it this way. His theory aroused a lot of controversy. He was dismissed as a crackpot, but back then he had no way of showing he was right.
Yet Alfred Wegener was to be proved correct. His theory wasn't demonstrated until decades after his death. This is where the idea of the continental shelf originated.
This is what the supercontinent looked like. 180 million years ago, Africa, South America, Antarctica and India would have been a single landmass. I'll start by cutting out a piece here. Let's say this piece represents India. I'll pull out this piece of cake and the continent drifts away. This area is the continental shelf. Here, we have a little indentation. And this tip, this brim, is expanded and deformed geologically. And this shelf area contains the oil and gas resources that many companies want.
The idea that this submerged land mass is really a prolongation of your land territory. You know, it's who can argue that this would not be part of your territory?
The more people became aware of the large quantities of oil and gas in the ocean floor, the more coastal states tried to claim it for themselves. They called for an international law based on the geological definition of a continental shelf, yet many states resisted. The Earth's history has not favored each country equally.
For instance, Russia has a wide shelf of more than 400 kilometers. By contrast, Southeast Africa has a continental edge of only 20 kilometers. These features are the result of geological evolution. Some countries are lucky, others are not.
To balance out the geological differences that emerged over hundreds of millions of years, the nations of the world abandoned the geological definition of a continental shelf in favor of a legal definition that applies to all coastal states uniformly. Regardless of its undersea geology, every country is granted a continental shelf extending 200 nautical miles out to sea, its exclusive economic zone.
So the idea of this 200 as a magic number became acceptable to many states at the conference. But the broad margin states did not accept this because, of course, they, as far as they're concerned, they would come out as a loser. And it's not just the U.S. Also other states such as Canada, Russia is also one of those states. So they were not willing to give this up.
Ultimately, states with a wide continental shelf prevailed. A clause with momentous consequences was quietly appended to the Law of the Sea Convention. The clause in question is Article 76. It says that a state can lay claim to its geological continental shelf in addition to its legal continental shelf, provided that the state can supply data demonstrating the shelf's outer limits within 10 years. The time limit triggered a veritable run on the world's oceans and the largest land allocation in world history. For the first time in the history of humanity, a land grab occurred, based not anymore on traditional forms of power, but rather on geological findings.
Scientists have a special role in the case of the ocean because the geophysical difference isn't as obvious. It's not as experienced. If you're on an island, you tend to know you're on an island. You can experience where land meets water. I have no idea where the seabed ends, where the continental shelf ends. And, nobody does from everyday observation.
So I would like to explain you now how actually Article 76 of the Convention on the Law of the Sea actually works. And it's all about natural prolongation of the landmass. So we have a landmass here. Actually, the land continues underwater, something like this.
Everything is decided by the point where the continental gradient drops off at the foot of the continental slope. This spot is used to calculate the shelf's outer limits. A state can choose between two formulas. It can extend its borders 60 nautical miles or 111 kilometers from this point seawards. It can be more advantageous, however, to use the sediment thickness rule. Because the sediments originate on the mainland, the state has a territorial claim to this part of the seabed. The thicker the layer of sediment, the better. According to the thickness rule, the continental shelf extends until the point where the thickness of sediment amounts to 1% of the distance from the foot of the slope.
It's a little bit complicated formula, but I'll give you an example. Suppose that at this point we are 200 kilometers away from the foot of the slope. So this distance here is 200 kilometers. If we have 2 kilometers of sediments here, it means we have 1% of this distance, then the continental shelf can finish here. So obviously a coastal state that can demonstrate this will use this limit, the outer limit of the continental shelf, rather than that one.
Because no one but geologists understand geological data, only they can determine how far a state's sovereign rights extend over the ocean. Hence, a commission of experts was founded in New York, where the global community recognizes states and their sovereign borders.
Ich war von 1997 bis 2002 Mitglied.
I was a member of the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf from 1997 to 2002. The good news is that the institution exists at all. Otherwise, countries would have already taken up arms and declared war.
Karl Hintz helped build this commission, yet now he is among its fiercest critics.
Sie haben in der Kommission nur noch Vertreter.
The Commission consists only of representatives from potential claimant states. Each swears to serve as an expert and in a professional capacity, but I don't think they ever lose sight of their national interests.
The 21 geologists of the Continental Shelf Commission work at building DC2 on United Nations Plaza. Filming here is forbidden. None of the members may speak to the public, in spite of or precisely because of the fact that their decisions can change maritime power relations.
Diese Leute unterstehen einer confidentiality.
These people all sign a confidentiality agreement and are thus very cautious. When you ask them how's it going, they won't tell you anything.
weil es durchaus sein könnte,
They're afraid of breaking the agreement and thus the law, and being kicked off the commission.
und das heißt, sie schmeißen ihn raus.
The experts who tip the scales in rulings about maritime territories are notoriously unforthcoming. Yet one member has agreed to speak about the Commission on the condition that he meet us not in New York, but in Brittany, in France.
Personally, I have always felt that we could do an effort to actually be more transparent and to communicate more. So my name is Walter Roest. I'm a marine geophysicist. I work at ENDEVR in France, and I'm a member of the UN Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. Well, the first thing I should say is that the work of the Commission, yes, it's true, is quite treated in a very confidential fashion. And the main reason behind that from the beginning, well, there's two reasons. One is that we're dealing with sovereign rights of states. Secondly, many of the states submit data that are actually confidential data derived from petroleum industry, for instance. And those data, they have to be treated with a very high level of confidentiality.
There are powerful interests behind the states' petitions. Seabed data have enormous economic significance. This information contains important clues for where natural resources might be located. Industries and states are not inclined to share this information, which can be worth billions.
I think what I could say is that as members of the Commission, I think we consider ourselves really scientific and technical experts, but we also are very conscientious of the fact that our recommendations or our decisions that we make have huge impact, both politically, economically, and so on. So, is it possible to distinguish those two?
The geologists in the Commission have the job of evaluating continental shelf data submitted by countries. Officially, the Commission only makes recommendations, but since their conclusions are not corroborated by anyone else, they have de facto authority to decide which nations get which territories. 5 nations that border the Arctic Ocean are in a bid to extend their sovereign rights in the direction of the North Pole: Denmark, Canada, US, Norway, and Russia. Each wants as much territory as possible. The area is estimated to contain 10% of the world's oil reserves.
Durch Zufall wurden mir
Emails were accidentally sent to me that Russian officials had sent someone else. One said, Hinz has turned down the Russian submission. I thought, oh boy, I can forget about traveling to Russia for the time being.
Russia understood how to take advantage of the new law early on. In 2002, it was one of the first countries to submit a claim to the Continental Shelf Commission. The Russians asserted rights to no less than the entire Central Arctic, an area of 1.5 million square kilometers, including the North Pole. Karl Hinz was known as the man who shot down Russia's claim on account of insufficient scientific evidence. But Russia employed a trick that many states are using to push through their claims even after they are rejected.
I am actually not allowed to talk about it. It is forbidden by confidentiality rules. The Commission's recommendations disappeared at the behest of the Russian government. The Russians didn't want them released. Instead, they wanted to return with a revised submission.
In the race to control the world's oceans, data is key. If a claim is rejected, nations can have researchers collect more information. This effectively allows countries to circumvent the Commission's 10-year deadline. Governments can submit new reports until their claims are approved. Each additional geological submission brings with it fresh room for interpretation.
The name of the game is, if you want to have the best answer for your maritime boundaries and/or the best answer for your extended continental shelf, you go out and collect the best modern-day data possible to go and use for your final application for law of the sea to ensure that the answer is the best that it can be.
Russia has since submitted revised data to the Continental Shelf Commission. But Canada and Denmark want the North Pole too. How can other countries with the same scientific arguments claim the same territory? What is an ocean? And what is a continent? It is a question of perspective. The Commission evaluates the scientific data and makes a decision either for or against a state's claim. Once a claim is approved, it is binding and cannot be reversed.
I don't know. I mean, we have no... If we replace all members of the Commission, hypothetically, we have 21 new members, and we would give them the same case, would we get the same result? I can be quite certain we will not get exactly the same result. So I don't believe that the Commission can be 100% right, because 100% right does not exist in natural sciences. We're talking about interpreting based on relatively sparse data.
The Commission is a group of experts selected by the General Assembly of the United Nations. But of the 21 members on the Commission, 19 come from countries that have applied for territorial expansions. Do national interests play a role in the decisions of its members? What is certain is that their recommendations are not contested.
Now this is interesting. The Continental Shelf Commission is not a regulatory body. One might say it's unique in the world. Who regulates the Continental Shelf Commission?
Nobody.
Why Kingston? Well, there were two candidates, Jamaica and Malta. And all I can say is that Jamaica won. So we ended up in Kingston.
Michael Lodge works for the International Seabed Authority, or ISA. It is a type of executive council for the ocean floor. They supervise what the states are unable to get their hands on with continental shelf claims. The ISA's official motto is that the deep seabed is the common heritage of mankind. They believe that the ocean belongs to everyone.
The common heritage concept includes a number of basic ideas. The first idea is that it's an area over which no single state can claim sovereignty, and it is to be administered for the benefit of all mankind.
The Seabed Authority has the task of redistributing riches that are not in the sovereign areas of national states. If a country or a company makes a profit from mining minerals, the ISA ensures that poor countries and countries without coastal borders receive a share. When founding the ISA, states agreed to make environmental regulations as strict as possible for deep-sea mining in international waters, because no one knows its effect on the maritime ecosystem. But the clout of the ISA has its limits.
Right now, there are about a staff of 40 to administer about 58% of the seabed of the planet.
In the third floor of an office building at 14 Port Royal Street in Kingston, ISA council members tend to the maritime heritage of mankind, around a third of the Earth's surface.
So the ISA has no standing in the Continental Shelf Commission. It's not an observer to the Commission. It has no right to object to a recommendation of the Commission. The Commission's recommendations go only to the coastal state that is making the submission and not to anybody else.
The ocean covers over 360 million square kilometers, almost 3/4 of the Earth's surface. Over 40% of this area has been assigned to legal continental shelves. Claims on expanded geological continental shelves make up another 10% of the ocean. It is now projected that around 57% of the oceans will eventually be under the control of coastal states.
For centuries now, men have sailed the seas to fish, to fight, and to trade. Men have brought home the life-giving harvest of the sea. But now other men have come to the sea. New kinds of pioneers exploring the deep green darkness that covers 2/3 of the Earth's surface. Oceanographers, marine biologists, geologists. And now the oil men are here, probing deep into the sea floor and mining its riches.
In the year 2000, that's the latest set of figures that we have, the International Seabed Authority, which is based in Jamaica, they came up with an estimate as they saw that governments were starting to work through this more recent component for law of the sea for the extended continental shelf. They have a figure just below 12,000 US trillion dollars is the in situ estimate of seabed resources in the extended continental shelves.
Sulfur, diamonds, metals, petroleum. If we want them, if we need them, we must find a way to get them.
We have just reached a point recently where the offshore development has now surpassed hydrocarbon production from the onshore.
Estimates about the quantity of natural resources buried in the seabed are highly speculative. But if the figure of 12,000 trillion US dollars is right, it would be enough to write every person on Earth a check for $1.5 million. France is one of the countries leading the charge to claim a piece of the pie. But La Grande Nation has a leg up over many other states. A colonial past.
Oui, ça a été une surprise de découvrir.
Yes, it was a surprise to find out that we could get more than we originally thought.
Et le gouvernement, quand il a commencé.
Soon after the government started to think about this matter in 2002, officials assembled in the Prime Minister's office. They made a list of territories where they would claim territorial extensions.
Des territoires où nous allions demander des extensions. Voilà.
Thanks to its colonial past, France administers islands in almost every ocean of the world. Now it stands to gain substantial maritime territory in each. Currently, France has 11 claims pending at the Continental Shelf Commission.
French Guyana and the Antilles, several territories in the Indian Ocean, the area around La Réunion, the Kerguelen Islands, the Crozet Islands, and the islands of Amsterdam and St. Paul. In the Pacific Ocean, there is New Caledonia, French Polynesia, Wallis, and Futuna. The last region named in France's application is Saint-Pierre and Miquelon in the Atlantic.
France has claimed territories amounting to some 12 million square kilometers, around 20 times the size of continental France. If the claims are approved, it will become the world's second largest maritime nation, its sovereign rights stretching over an area of the ocean almost as large as the entire Arctic.
Science is decisive for expanding the continental shelf because all the petitions are based on scientific evidence. You can't go to the Commission on the limits of the continental shelf and say, I am a member of the Security Council and I want to expand my country's continental shelf. That's not how it works. Politics has no place here.
Using these rock samples, we hope to demonstrate that the structures that we include as part of the natural extension of French Polynesia's continental shelf differ from those of the ocean floor. We are trying to conduct a kind of paternity test. We want to find out whether the area belongs to the continental shelf or to the deep ocean basin.
French Polynesia is one of France's largest maritime areas. Soon, it could grow to continental proportions.
People need to understand it's not just France that proceeds in this way. International law allows a state to claim up to 200 nautical miles. Each island can create its own economic zone, each one. Take the example of French Polynesia in the Pacific. This group of islands alone adds up to around 4 million square kilometers for France.
Islands represent a crucial trump card in the battle to control the world's oceans. It's all about geometry. Because islands are surrounded by water, their sovereign territory extends around them in a circle. Even if an island were just a small rock, its maritime zone would be larger than Germany. If a group of islands forms an archipelago, a common baseline around the entire cluster of islands is used to calculate the maritime territory.
All those little islands can theoretically represent a territorial expansion of several million square kilometers. Fiji is one country currently pursuing this strategy, and the question arises, is this fair?
I have 9-year-old twins. Their names are Tamaki and Iwao. I gave them these names because each is written with the Japanese character meaning atoll, though they are pronounced differently.
This man is Japan's hope in the race to claim the world's oceans. He cracked the genetic code of a life form that could help Japan add several 100,000 square kilometers to its territory. Hajime Kayane is a geoscientist at the University of Tokyo. He specializes in corals, organisms that display characteristics of both animals and plants.
Corals are creatures, but they harbour plants in their bodies with which they share an active symbiotic relationship, to which they supply sustenance.
Yet Kayane has delved further into their biology, into the secret of their reproduction, and found a method for breeding them on a large scale.
This is a novel approach, and we had to overcome many hurdles, and it started as a big experiment. We are the first in the world to use this technology.
Mass-produced corals. 60,000 tiny coral babies are being artificially bred at a farm on Akajima, a small island off the coast of Okinawa. But for what purpose?
Minasan 皆さんは日本で一番南にある島のことを知っていますか？その島の名は沖ノ鳥島。周りには他の島が全くなく、太平洋にポツンと一つ浮かんでいる島なのです。
Okinotorishima is located 1,700 kilometers south of Tokyo. It is a small coral atoll. During high tide, it clears the surface by mere centimeters. Japan regards it as an island, but the existence of Okinotori is under threat.
There is speculation that ocean levels could rise between 20 and 100 centimeters by the end of the century. If this happens, Okinotorishima will vanish.
But Japan has decided that Okinotori must not vanish. Its maritime area represents a massive territorial expansion, bringing with it sovereign rights over fish and other natural resources.
The surface area of the Japanese mainland totaled 380,000 square kilometers. When Okinotorishima is included, the exclusive economic zone increases by 420,000 square kilometers, an area rich in fish and mineral deposits.
The maritime zone that Okinotori brings with it is larger than Japan itself, and this does not even factor in the atoll's outer continental shelf. But this territory will be lost if the reef disappears. Kayane's corals are being used to save the atoll. Thousands of them have been shipped to Okinotori to preserve the reef and make it as large as possible. A pilot project on an island near Taiwan is studying what Okinotori might one day look like thanks to corals.
These corals, these branches of corals, are continuously bred to keep the atoll alive. This is a decisive factor. Divers will monitor the reproduction and growth of the corals.
Soon, Okinotori could become a real island like the pilot project on Barasu, which consists entirely of old corals. Japan's resourcefulness is not being welcomed by everyone, however. Its new maritime claims have raised tensions with its powerful neighbour China, which itself is currently involved in island territory disputes with a whole array of countries. As states attempt to extend their maritime zones as far as possible, many international conflicts have arisen.
Operating with due regard as required under international law.
In the South China Sea, 8 countries are fighting for oil reserves valued at $100 billion.
under international law.
There is no part of the world that is safer than others. In other words, with 53% of all maritime boundaries within the EEZ unresolved, we're seeing conflicts raising up to volatile levels driven predominantly by resource development for the offshore. Typically, we'll end up having a coastal frontage area that looks like this. And let's say that we have a land boundary where country A is sitting here and country B is sitting here. Back in the 70s, when we were moving from oil and gas exploration on land to the marine area, they may have negotiated a provisional boundary that sort of allowed them for country A to issue offshore oil and gas blocks and country B. And let's say in a more recent scenario, an extremely large discovery is made. And let's say the neighboring country, country B, then all of a sudden says, we'd like to have some of that. So they are starting to propose new boundaries, as this initial line was not even a modern day accepted boundary line. I want you to get this little thing in there, okay? So this would be as an add-on. The importance, again, of the discrepancy is here. Plus or minus 100 meter could equal millions of dollars.
Oceans have become contested territories the world over. Everyone wants a piece of the pie. New boundaries are being drawn for dividing up its riches. Powerful industries are on the move in the deep sea. No one can predict the consequences of this industrialization of the world's oceans. They are the consequences of a revolution that began years ago and has mostly gone unnoticed. The ocean is being divided up like land.
You also have to realize that the ocean is our future, so we need to have some way of deciding who is responsible for what and where and when. And so at this point in time, this is maybe not the ideal solution, but this is the solution that was created with the convention.
The world's oceans, far more than its continents, build a cohesive ecological system, a sensitive continuum in which what happens to one area can affect all the others. It is now up to the world's nations whether they will take responsibility for their newly acquired maritime territories.